Hello and welcome to the Afikra Community Podcast. My name is Mysa Hussein and I'm your host today from London. I'm also joined by my amazing co-host, Yasmin Khawaja, who's based in Ramallah in Palestine. Hey Yasmin, how are you?
Hey Mysa, doing good.
So today on the series, our special guest is Abdulah Al-Ghoul, who's part of the Afikra chapter in Toronto.
By the way, if you're new to the podcast, each episode lets us meet Afikra presenters who have spoken at one of our events around the world. So Abdullah is one of our presenters who was asked to choose a topic that allowed him the chance to learn something new about the Arab world, something that was new to him, something that he's not an expert in. Our goal is that this episode inspires others to become curious about other aspects of the Arab world's histories and cultures.
Yeah, and today Abdullah is talking to us about a presentation that he gave in our Amman chapter while he was visiting Jordan in March. He prepared a foreword, and for anyone who doesn't know, a foreword is a very short presentation inspired by one source. It's kind of like when someone sends you or literally forwards you a link by email or WhatsApp or shares something on Facebook or Twitter. And Abdullah's choice was an article on Al-Jazeera entitled Queen Elizabeth II's Last Foothold in Arabia. So if you live in or near one of our global chapters and you're also interested in doing a presentation, check out afikra.com/workshop to sign up. And also don't forget to explore our library to see what other people have presented on for the last, 6 or 7 years. There are so many topics to look through. But for now, let's dive in with Abdullah. So we're here today to talk about your presentation that you did in Amman in March at Dar al-Enda, and we're also here to get to know you as well. So first, where are you right now?
I'm based out of Toronto in Canada. That's home base for me. Amman, I just happen to be there visiting family, and I figured might as well be part of the local chapter there as a bypasser or as a cameo appearance. So yeah, that's kind of how this whole presentation came together.
Amazing. Okay. And actually, I know that Yasmin coached you for your presentation, right?
True.
Yeah, I got to learn a lot actually through this presentation. Like I didn't know at all like any background, and it was really fun doing it with Abdullah.
Yeah,
okay, cool. So just very quick question, Abdullah. Tell us a little bit more about you. Like, what do you do? Anything like that?
Yeah, I'll try to keep it really, concise because I can go on for days. But I basically have a background in hospitality, but I most recently have been working in digital marketing for the last 10 years. I also have been involved in the arts and culture pretty much my whole life. Dar al-Enda actually belongs to my mom in Amman, so it's a 25-year-old private art gallery there. I also have an online project where I represent about 30 artists out of the Arab world and help them sell their art online called Bas Sou'al. That's basically me, a jack of several trades, but I try to focus them around the arts, humanities, communications, and that kind of stuff.
Oh, wow, that's fantastic. So a lot of this is remote, right? Like it's not specific to Toronto or anything like that.
Precisely, yeah.
Okay, very cool. And you're involved in the Toronto chapter?
I am, yeah. Whenever I can be, yeah. Like if I'm in town, I definitely like to show up and support the team here as well.
Okay, amazing. Well, on that note, I think that we should get started. Let's dive in straight away with your presentation.
Yeah.
Take it away.
Yeah, thanks, guys. So basically, yeah, my presentation is a formatted presentation. It's about Queen Elizabeth II's last foothold in Arabia via Al-Jazeera's website. And I presented this on March 19th in Amman. It says Toronto chapter here, but it was actually presented to Amman. And I'm just going to skip next. So basically, just the usual spiel on the presenter's promise. I'm not an expert, but I promised that I tried to learn as much as I could to satisfy my curiosity about the topic. Someone here might know more about this topic than I do. Please correct me, ask questions, and contribute, but do it nicely. And I am not trying to persuade you of my agenda or convince you to take action. My only hope is that my presentation might cultivate your own curiosities, which maybe speaking too soon already worked on Yasmin.
Yeah.
And yeah, that's basically it. We can dive right in if you guys want to. I'll give you like a little bit of background, like real quick as to why this was an important topic or an interesting topic. So to actually take it all the way back to September of last year, around the time that Queen Elizabeth II passed, We had a brainstorming session for several ambassadors across the globe, I guess, with Yasmin. And we were asked to come up with a topic. And this was one that really jumped at me for several reasons. And the fact that, like colonization has obviously had an impact and continues to kind of show its impact even in this day and age on the region. The fact that Aden was the only official colony was a very, very intriguing notion. And that's basically what led me to expanding upon this topic or diving deeper into this article and then all the nerding out that followed suit, basically. So Aden, again, as the subheadline reads here, was the only British colony in the Arab world until British forces left it in 1967. So for context, this photograph right here was taken in 1954, April 1954, and just less than a year after Queen Elizabeth II's royal coronation. So she basically stepped into the only Arab territory and even had a knighthood ceremony there. That was the only territory to ever become a colony of the British Empire, meaning no direct rule. It was directly ruled by the empire, which gave it a unique status and, a status that continues to hold, I guess, relative to its peers. Basically over here, so just a bit of background context, I guess, about Aden. It had been a British colony since 1839. So 1954 is when it became an official colony of the British Empire. But prior to that, it had been colonized for a pretty long time. It commanded the southern entrance to the Red Sea. I'll show you a more zoomed out image in just a second. It was also an important British air and naval base on the route to India, and it was crucial for safeguarding access to Middle Eastern oil supplies that were being discovered, obviously, over that period of time. Now the promised zoom out. Basically, so British control ran deep into the area surrounding the city. Just for context here, you can see my cursor dancing around Aden at the bottom left corner over here, or southwest, I guess. But basically the entire region, interestingly enough, so if I'm to be completely fair to the narrative I'm sharing right now, should be zooming out a bit more, because the Aden Protectorate was a status that we used to describe basically all British control over many parts of the Gulf, not only including what is now southern Yemen, but basically Bahrain, Qatar, and even the United Arab Emirates. So all that was really an extension of the Aden Protectorate. So just want to make that distinction clear. Down there. But basically, yeah, it was only Aden that was directly controlled by the United Kingdom with absolutely no local ruling alongside. The city had a reputation for being cosmopolitan, modern, and home to one of the world's busiest ports at the time. And the Brits used it to maintain dominance in a region. And again, as I just mentioned, that was growing pretty rapidly in terms of importance as far as oil and gas reserve discoveries were concerned.
Just a quick question, Abdullah. What's going on do we have any idea of kind of what's going on in the rest of the Khalij kind of region at this time in terms of their relationship with the British and anything like that, just situating Aden within Yemen and the region itself?
Yeah, that's a great question, Mysa, to which I do not have an answer right now.
That's fine.
But I'll definitely make it a point to find out, just so I can go to sleep at night. But the long and the short of it is, it definitely I think the more or the most immediate thing that I would look at is what was happening in what is known as North Yemen, right? Because again, those two have historically been at a bit of a rift and continue to be to this day, right? So I'd be tribalism obviously would be the first thing that I would probably fall back on to say it's really a peninsula of tribes, and again that continues to inform how it's being ruled today to a large degree. So I feel like there's something about tribal, let's say, invisibility or weakness that must have given way to Aden being colonizable, if that's a term, right?
Yeah, and at this moment in history, if you zoom out further, it's the end of the World War II. Yeah. The pie in the Arab world was definitely split up. Yeah. And what we know about Aden, or what I know, is that in Yemen now, there are basically two capitals, right? So we have Sana'a and Aden. So that must be linked to what Abdullah was saying about South Yemen and North Yemen.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, cool. And then one last thing, actually, the proximity, right? Like, and that obviously is part of its like geopolitical, I guess, strength as a location, right? The fact that it's really on that cusp or at that really that edge of Africa, Eastern Africa, probably informs something, with how it was controlled. Because we'll see later on that it was even grouped into the currency zone, right? Like the East African shilling. So it even had the same currency as the colonies in Eastern Africa, right? As opposed to being again like lumped in with the rest of the Khalij or the Iranian Peninsula.
It's closest to their colonies there. Yeah.
Cool. All right. Basically this photograph again was really the inspiration behind this whole piece, and obviously the masthead to the article that I'm mostly focusing on here. This is a depiction of the only knighthood ceremony that the Aden colony ever had. And this is Sayyid Abu Bakr bin Sheikh Al-Kaf, really unique as well knighthood ceremony in a lot of ways. He was a local leader. He was knighted during the ceremony, but he refused to bow before the queen because of his religious beliefs. And this is where you see an adaptation. They brought a chair so that he could kneel, basically coming as close as he could to bowing without, violating his beliefs or really kind of meeting halfway, basically, on both ends there. And then beyond that, obviously, again, like I kind of alluded to it, but the turmoil did ensue past that point, unfortunately. From the British standpoint, this is known as the Aden Emergency, the national uprising and the British withdrawal that followed suit pretty shortly thereafter, like 13 years, right? After that image that we just saw, a happier moment of, knighthood and really like inclusiveness into, the empire, right? Type of thing. But it was basically the same Arab nationalism that forced the Brits out of Egypt's Suez Canal. The decade prior, Yemenis rose up, fought for independence between 1963 and 67. And in 67, basically, the Brits had to flee Aden, with the last High Commissioner being airlifted out by helicopter. So again, an emergency is definitely the right term here, because it definitely was a state of urgency with their withdrawal that followed suit. This is, another archival image, Yasmin, that just basically shows, that conflict between people, right? And like basically the nationalism, fueled groups, right? Like that were rising up against the system. That's all the context I have on that photo, but I know it is of that era, and it is associated with the Aden Emergency, where again, like you don't see the flip side of it, which would have been the Brits being forced out basically by the locals.
That's kind of connected to a question that I had, which was like, do we know about the British resistance to the independence movement? And like, was it much of a movement, or was it just a sudden rebellion like that kind of came out of nowhere?
Great question. So I have something in the further readings at the end myself.
Okay.
So there's basically an entire, there's a slew of like websites and articles and readings, right? There's one that is actually like dedicated exclusively to this emergency, where you could look up all sorts of like granular details, right? About it. But yeah, to your point, it was kind of like a national uprising, like almost like a civil war. But again, they were obviously rising up against the colonizers here. So there's definitely, again, like a lot of parallels between that and what would have happened in Egypt just in the mid 50s with the Suez Canal and the forcing out of the Brits there as well. So it was not an overnight thing. It was definitely an ongoing resistance, right, on both sides, really, because
and inspired by their nearby Arab state. Yeah.
100.
Yeah. I mean, and there's like so many independence movements that like Algeria is happening at this time too. Like that everyone is kind of just like fighting for this.
Yeah.
It's this moment like across the region.
Yeah.
Another thing that I think would be super interesting to find out, maybe you know this from like some of your reading, is was there any interest within Yemen of staying under the British? Like, was there any desire to continue being ruled by Elizabeth II, by the British Empire?
That picture says no, because
I mean,
we're looking at.
But I think like in a lot of places, the elites often tend to align themselves with the colonizers
sure.
to a certain extent.
There's
I'm
always-
generalizing, of course. And then the more working class, the laborers, the kind of more rural communities, they tend to be like, no, this is not benefiting us. So
Yeah. So I mean, again, great question. I feel obligated to say that again, or questions. I saw the long and the short of it is I could not, and I dove pretty deep, right, into this one. I could not find any traces or any indicators that there was even, a fractional party or a minority that was interested in staying. I'm sure they would have existed. One thing I'll get to later on is really kind of speaking how all this has kind of faded from memory as well. This whole blip in their history, because again, I mean, we're in the present day, or I was going to say the relative future to what we're talking about here. There was a lot of turmoil and a lot of political shifting that ensued as well. Like, so shortly thereafter, right? Like right after this uprising and that independence came through, they basically went all the way out into setting up, again, in the spirit of being unique and an only, instance in the Arab world's history. Aden became the only Marxist state, or South Yemen, right? And so again, like to kind of put things back into context here, late 60s is where that, movement towards, Marxism and then what ended up becoming, more of a communist stronghold became really kind of that next phase of their history, right? So I think that once you bring that into consideration and you pit it against just, really putting it at almost the other end of the spectrum of the capitalism that the empire perpetuated and stood for and continues to stand for, right? Even in its present non-empirical state. But yeah, I think that my hunches, or what I've seen here, I shouldn't go off of my hunch, obviously, but what I've observed and what I can conclude with fair confidence is I don't think anyone was really too interested in staying. What is very mysterious and very interesting, though, is why did this honeymoon only last like 10, 13 years, right? So that to me was the jarring / intriguing part of this whole somewhat hidden part of the region's history.
I guess there are a lot of questions that you end up, like, especially in the forward format, because we have a forward, a spotlight, and a feature. In the forward, you're only doing surface level. It's just a 10-minute presentation at these events. So you don't really do the deep dive you would in a feature. You're going to come up with all these questions that I think would eventually make a great feature if you were ever to like pick this up again and want to expand it. But for now, like, it's mostly, you're just going to come up with all these interesting questions.
Yeah, it's giving dissertation vibes, not gonna lie, but it's been a while since I did one, so it might be time for it. Moving on to, I guess, a brighter image, but again, that next phase in their history that I was talking about, right? So basically, South Yemen is what Aden's, immediate surroundings basically became, right? The local independence fighters that were depicted in the photo on the previous slide. They went out, not those exact same guys, I should preempt. They went on to declare the People's Democratic Republic of Yemen, aka South Yemen, with Aden as its capital.
And that is the Marxist state, right?
100%, right? Like the People's Republic or, Democratic Republic. Those are, again, terms that I think we continue to see in some cases when it comes to nations that sway a bit more communist or Marxist, right? But basically, interestingly enough, again, South Yemen would go on to become the only Marxist state in the entire Arab world. And much like a lot of its counterparts, it did not survive the collapse of the Soviet Union, which was its primary backer. In 1990, South Yemen united with North Yemen, thereby forming a unified republic.
Up until sorry to interrupt. Up until 1990, then when they became a unified republic, what was North Yemen doing? Like, what was going on in Sana'a at this time?
So you know what? I was so deep into South Yemen myself that I didn't almost ignored what was going on with North Yemen just because there's so much there as well, right? But North Yemen, again, like if I had to guess, or again, just kind of putting the pieces together from what we know in the present day, the alliance was definitely swaying a bit more to its northern neighbors, like Saudi Arabia, right? So it was, again, you could kind of see the two sides of the coin, or those geopolitical superpowers at the time, right? Basically ripples of the Cold War kind of taking form, right? yeah, and like the one thing that I could tell you that's concrete information here is 1994 is when another or like a civil war erupted, right? Because that was not a happy union either, right? Like so North and South. And again, I think if you look into more recent, instances in history or whatever, it still sadly is the case where it's not a very uniform or a very, let's say, I guess, yeah, like
So now there's a debate on the Capital that should give us
100%.
the
They're
sign.
not on the same page. Exactly. Yeah. To a large degree. Right. So basically, that's kind of what it comes down to. Right. Like, is that you get, bits like, growing resentment towards the North. Right. The United Yemen's first president was from there. Right. But then that again led to a separatist sentiment. So again, there's so much that we could go into, and there's so much, again, like density to its recent history, even into the present decade that we're in right now, that kind of retells the story of those two pieces. Mysa were not really one and the same, but I think that can be said largely for a lot of what those divisional Sykes-Picot lines were like.
Of course.
By the way, when I presented this in Amman, random segue, like minimal questions were asked, right? Because I think people were a bit uncomfortable, right? But at the prospect of talking about something that was political. But to me, this is more of a geopolitical and maybe not as close as it was to the people in Amman, obviously. But I do think it is a very interesting topic that kind of again kind of goes back to the whole region's relationship and how we're reconciling or attempting to reconcile, colonization and the divisional lines that came of that. But again, that's giving dissertation vibes, so I'm gonna cut it off.
That's the whole point of like a community presentation. Like the three of us, none of us are historians at this time, right? We all are just very curious and learning more about this region.
Yeah.
And that's why all these questions come up, because there's just so much to know.
Yeah.
But Mysa's just hitting you with all those feature questions
so
that you can outline for your next feature.
I'm so sorry. No,
you're gonna have to expand this.
Yeah, definitely, by the way. But just sorry, back to what you were saying about like this being a political topic. Like, of course it is, but I mean, these things, they don't operate in a vacuum, These things go on to explain, like, not just what's going on in Yemen at the time, but across the region at the time, and then even all the way over here in the UK, where I'm based. And then also it goes on to explain, really, like, to the present day, what's going on in the country, and these things contribute, like, along the years to what's going on now. And so, these topics are, they touch on politics, of course, but it's so interesting to just understand the context of, what was going on at this time.
But I get it. Like people in Amman, Jordan, like Palestine, generally this region, like we all have these taboo topics. Or like,
of course.
I know, right?
Yeah, of course. And obviously also as afikra, we always try and stay non-political and things like that. But, you can't talk about the Arab world without talking about some politics.
Well, I was going to say, I being born into the Arab world and being apolitical, I challenge you, and that goes out to everyone. But but it's all good, right? Again, this is all relatively recent history, which to your point, Mysa, again, like continues to inform the world that we see and experience to this day. So on that note, one final, like somewhat political, tidbit here is, there's still, again, like that Southern Transitional Council that's alive and well, and that is calling for the restoration of South Yemen. So again, there's still that rift there that hopefully they'll be able to work out. But again, like it's kind of an ongoing piece there. On to more trivial matters, basically, just to kind of rewind to again those 13 years of colonization. Much like a lot of the colonies or whatever is still like part of the Commonwealth, right? Like for instance, New Zealand and Australia, the colony of Aden had its own little adapted Britishy looking flag, which I thought was really unique, really interesting. And again, like as I was mentioning earlier on, they were lumped into the Eastern Africa like economic zone or that division there. So they even had their own official currency that, as you can see, came in both languages, the East Africa shilling that was used in much of that region as well. Or again, specifically Eastern Africa, which Aden was lumped into. So I thought these were some pretty interesting relics or like remnants of that short and somewhat forgotten period in time. And that's maybe what leads me to, my next and, final slide of actual me blabbing. Like beyond a statue of Queen Victoria, a clock tower, affectionately known as Little Ben over here. Like very, very few landmarks or signs of British rule remain, which again is kind of bringing it back home for me as to why this was such an interesting topic that, had we not really started talking about, Elizabeth II's legacy and colonization and the British Empire and all that stuff, I think this might have stayed buried in a lot of ways, right? Until someone unearthed it, or again, like there are very few visual remnants. There's a few landmarks that are here, but again, the clock tower being really the most prominent one, which, as you can tell by its name and just by context, it's not really that big. But yeah, what's interesting beyond that really is, the legacy of Aden's connection is way, way stronger down till this very day. And Mysa, maybe you can echo this, not to flip back questions your way, to India, right? So basically, and again, this kind of goes back to the protectorate, which predated, the colony, right? That basically extended the British Empire into what would bridge over into the Indian Sea and then the Indian, parts of the British colony, right? And a big part of that is the migration of people, right? Coming through to work or live there, right? So thousands of Yemenis descended from India because they came to work in the colony when it was ruled as part of British India. And as a result of that, again, obviously we try to not talk about food too much at Afikra, but that is one of my favorite things to talk about. Again, I think it is
We talk
a
about
really...
food. There's a whole mukbang
I
series.
know, I know. Yeah, but I try to not to talk too much about it, but it is an imprint, right? Obviously on a nation or its people as to what cultures have walked through it or influenced it, right? So Indian food has had profound influence on basically the Yemeni cuisine or South Yemeni cuisine, I guess if we are to be more specific, including Aden's favorite food, zurbiyan, which is a rice, potato, and meat dish very similar to.
It's so good. It's so good.
You guys, I want to catch up the listeners just on like some pictures that we were looking at, and like, for people that can't see. So the little Big Ben that Abdullah was talking about, it's basically this picture of this coast with like this mountain and a bunch of like buildings that don't look like, fancy or well kept at all. And then out of nowhere, you have this like, clock tower that looks like, it's like you're standing in front of a European clock tower or something like that. And then to the back, you have the sea and the mountains. So that's the out of place we were talking about. And then for the money, it's also important to point out that it was Queen Elizabeth II. Is that her on the East Africa shilling?
Yes, indeed.
Yeah. And the flag also, I guess with the British flag, it has that small icon of the two sailing boats, which just shows how they probably looked at Aden as like, this port,
as a port
signifying its importance as a port in that time.
It's so crazy that they had shillings in Yemen.
Yeah,
I know, right?
What that is insane.
Yeah,
and it's not that long ago, right? So
definitely.
This is less than 100 years ago, right? So again, like it was relatively recent history, right? Which I again, and it was that tiny blip in time, which is why I thought it was interesting to call out.
Yeah. I was sorry, just to because I was thinking about what you were saying about India. Remind me, what year exactly did the British go into Aden?
Oh, go.
So they had basically the protectorate had been under rule since the 1800s, 1839. Let me just 1839 is when Aden became some form of colony, right? And then the official, again, colony of Aden came in the mid-50s. And again, it only lasted about 13 years.
Yeah. No, I just think it's because at this time in the 50s, I mean, late 40s, they lose, 47, they kind of lose, they lose India and Pakistan is created and all of that kind of thing. Mid 50s, 58, I think, they lose Iraq.
Mhm.
Like they're losing territories everywhere. And so it's just crazy that well, I mean, it makes sense, I suppose, that they're holding on to this little bit of land in Yemen next to the sea. They're just like, hey guys, we're here. We're still here, by the way.
Yeah.
We need to still be here somehow.
I know, right? And yeah, to your point, Mysa, yeah, like, I mean, the article was aptly named, right? Like Elizabeth II's last foothold in Arabia, right? Which quite literally was the case, given the context that you just provided, right? With all the, and again, like not even getting into, like the mandates, like the Palestinian mandate, or, all the other,
Yeah.
bits and pieces of colonies or protectorates, right?
So you
But yeah,
captured Mysa and I's curiosities and interests. Do you want to show
yeah,
us what we can like read and check out more?
yeah,
We want to
absolutely.
continue learning about this.
So that leads me to my next slide. So PBS actually did a really, really comprehensive coverage. That's the first article or the first reading that I would direct you guys to. So again, it's quite frankly a bit of an echo to what the Jazeera article would have depicted, but it's from a like it kind of does dive into other details that the Jazeera article just can't cover, given its relative brevity. The second one, Mysa, that's the one that I alluded to just a little while ago. So the Imperial War Museum has a short history of the Aden Emergency. It's basically a microsite that contains all sorts of information, even like details on what type of warships were being used and all that stuff, right? That kind of documents that whole region through artifacts or references and what have you. This last one, I am a huge fan of, and maybe I'll just jump back to like the slide that actually borrowed an image from that one, Huck Magazine. So this colorful, I guess white and blue building over here. There was a rare and evocative portrait of Yemen in the 70s by this documentary photographer that went all the way out there. So again, to put it into context, early 70s, 1967 is when the Brits would have left. And then, by the early 70s, it was already a Marxist state, right? So it was still a pretty recent phase where you would be able to see more of the stuff that, Yasmin, you were alluding to on the previous slide of saying, minimal artifacts or minimal landmarks were, remain to this day. That one actually shows a bit more of those. So if you're a fan of photography in general, or just kind of perceiving history in more of a visual format, I highly encourage anyone to look at that last one, because it is definitely, just for lack of better words, pretty dope photography that is contained in this little collection, I guess. But again, I think it shines a light on a lot of the things that we were talking about just now in this short period in time.
Amazing. This has been so interesting. There are like two follow-up things now that I really want to go and study. One of them is first, I never knew that it was the only Marxist state in the whole region, like, which is crazy to me. And that in that period, like, communism is everywhere. Like, it's in Palestine, it's in Iraq, it's in Lebanon. It's like everywhere is kind of like these communist sentiments are bubbling. So I'm so curious about interactions with Aden.
Yeah.
But also knowing that coffee kind of comes from Yemen. I don't know enough about the history of coffee. I know that there's like whole studies and books on it and everything like that. So I don't know the history about the timeline of when coffee moved around the world.
Yeah.
But I wonder, because the British love to steal resources. It's their favorite thing to do when they colonize a place. Yeah. So I'm so curious about whether, I don't know if this kind of had, if coffee in some way kind of like came over here in a
that could be a feature.
Way.
Yeah, that could be a good feature presentation.
That right there is waiting to be featured.
Right?
We recently had a guest on the Matbakh series, and I think there was an episode that briefly talked about coffee in Yemen.
Yes,
but not in maybe complete depth of like the history and tracing all that. But this was great. What else, Mysa, that you?
Oh no, I mean that's just to get started. It's fine. I need to think about all my other questions. I mean, being in the UK and honestly knowing nothing about the history of British colonialism in Yemen, like we just don't know about it. And obviously the British education system, we don't get taught about colonialism. We don't get taught about empire apart from the successes of empire and stuff. And so these are really big like blind spots, like, and that's coming from me who's also studied a lot of like Arab history. Like I really don't know. I think across the board, a lot of us, Yeah, a lot across the board though. Yemen is something that we don't read about enough and we don't study enough. And I think that it's such an important place that, the history is so interesting.
Yeah, that's why afikra is like a really cool space for this. And Abdullah, like this is your second one. It's really good.
Yeah, thanks,
really good
guys.
forward.
No, I appreciate it, and thank you for venturing with me on this new format, I guess. And really excited to I guess present whatever's up next or whatever one. No one calls dibs on coffee and its own
No,
route.
that's all yours. All
History,
yours.
I will gladly take that one.
Before we
Definitely
let you go, Mysa, can we play the fun game with Abdullah?
Yes. Before we do that, though, I just wanted to say, before we get started with some games with Abdullah, if anyone has been just inspired, and how can you not be, by Abdullah's presentation, and if you're interested in signing up to present with Afikra, visit our website to begin exploring all of your curiosities. And you can go on the website, go to www.afikra.com/workshop and sign up, talk to us, and we'll get you started with a presentation. And you can be the next Abdullah. So, I mean, of course, go for it.
For those of you watching this, I don't look as happy as I do in the photo, but I am. I'm really happy today. I'll tell you that.
All right. Well, I think we should get started with a little trivia game.
Cool.
So we're going to ask you some questions, Abdullah, and Yasmin is going to fact check your answers. So there's no way you can.
Okay. So this is the
get
point where
away.
I'm sharing my screen to start looking. Right? Okay. Bring it.
Okay. Well, it's just a few of them. So first question: name a place in the Arab world that's never been colonized or occupied by a European power or the Ottoman Empire.
Oh, I want to go out on a limb here and say Oman.
Okay.
Shall I tell him the answer now, Yasmin?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, okay. I'm so sorry, Abdullah. It's Saudi Arabia.
Okay, I should.
Close enough. Again, close enough. Close enough.
Now I feel like an idiot because I lived in Saudi for like 10 years.
No, that's fine.
Yeah, it's fine.
I think Oman was British. I think.
Yeah,
right?
again, I'm pretty sure actually, if anything, it was probably part of that protectorate that we were just talking about.
Probably.
But it's all, yeah.
Yeah, okay. So next, what Arab musical instrument inspired the guitar?
Oof. Oud or not? Qanun or oud? Can I give like a multiple choice answer?
Yeah,
I think so. I think we'll be nice.
You passed that one. It's
okay.
Well done.
Okay,
it's
nice.
Okay, amazing. All right. What is one Arab country most people don't know is an Arab country?
Ooh. Lebanon? I don't know. I feel like most people know okay, I'm about to throw some shade here, right? But you know how it's like publicized as Phoenician by a lot of people, but it's actually Arab. But what? Hold on, give me a sec.
Can I give you a multiple choice question instead? I feel like this is too hard, like that one.
It's a tough question. All right, shall we move on to the next question?
Okay, yeah, sure.
Yeah. Okay, fine. All right. What are 3 countries in the Arab world that have French as their first or second language over English?
Okay, that's an easy one. So Lebanon, Syria, and then I guess Morocco, Algeria, right? Tunisia.
Yeah, you got 5. Ding, ding.
Well done. Wait, Syria? Syria is obviously not first language, but second language. Would it be French over English?
So
now, obviously back.
I think Syria is one of those places that, so Syria was, when the pie was
under
between the French and the British, it was under the French.
Yeah,
But so I don't know if the language stuck around to be a second language today.
Yeah,
maybe.
But it was definitely the French there rather than the British.
It's a very similar story, Yasmin and Mysa, to like what would have happened in Lebanon, whereas through the years, right, like the dollarization of the language, or the mainstream language turning into English really over like the latter part of the 20th century and the current one, right? That's basically what would have happened in Syria. I do have the impression that they did cling a bit more intently to French, just out of I guess affinity, right, for the language or the history that they've had together. But,
that makes sense. Okay, next. What are the 4 colors on the Sudanese flag?
Sorry, that's a pass. I'm horrible with flags.
Next.
Yasmin, go for it. Do you know the answer?
Oh, yeah, it's the pan. I love flags. By the way, Abdullah, I kind of put these questions together so you can hate on me.
Yeah, no, I'm just like, it's not even 10 a.m. where I'm at, and I'm like,
This
yeah,
is way too hard.
no.
So it's the pan-Arab color flag, same as like Palestine: green, red, white, and
Okay, I could have sworn, but again, I didn't want to make any assumptions because it's like, it's probably just one of the,
This is just for fun.
Cool.
Okay. I'm going to do 2 more questions, okay? The first one is, name a fantasy creature in Arab literature.
I mean, the Phoenix is still applicable, right? I don't know, like,
Yeah. And your last name, Al-Ghoul.
yeah, that too, right? I was gonna say Abdulah Al-Ghoul, you know, one of those.
Okay, amazing. And then final question, name one UNESCO World Heritage Site in the Arab region.
I mean, I guess because it's been getting a lot of airtime, and because I completely forgot about Saudi and Nola. But
Is that a World Heritage? Is it classed as a World Heritage Site?
I believe it recently got classified, actually. Yeah. I can definitely research that, but I'm pretty sure that it's actually classified as a UNESCO World Heritage Site.
It might be. There are like 90. There are 90. Just for people to know, there are like 90 World Heritage sites around this region.
In the region, in the Arab region. Wow. Okay.
So in Saudi, there's just like a bunch. Yeah.
Okay.
Okay. Well,
I think we should give Abdullah a clap for that.
Yes. Well done. It's so early in Toronto. I'm so impressed.
It's fine.
And you did great, by the way. I think you got.
Right. Yeah. No, thank you guys.
Not most of them. Yeah. This was fun.
That was definitely a bit of a good way to wake the brain up.
Yeah. You can nap now, though. Don't worry. Thank you so much, Abdullah. This has been amazing. We've learned so much, and we've had a great time with you.
Yeah. Likewise, guys. Take it easy, and we'll talk again soon. All right.
Thank you.
Okay, that was really interesting. I didn't know that Yemen was such a key player in Britain's colonial project in our region. And more so, I really had no idea about the port of Aden and how important it was, and how much of this whole space was like at an economic boom. I think when I think of Yemen now, Mysa, it's really hard for me to imagine that reality, that picture, just because of all the information and the sources that I receive, mainly from like news these days. So listening to Abdullah's presentation like really took me back to this like hidden past.
Yeah, absolutely. There's so much I don't know about Yemen. Abdullah touched on this history of Marxism in Aden, and it's so interesting. I had no idea about any of that. And honestly, it's inspired me to learn so much more about Yemen, so I can't wait.